I'm Eric from Longbox Review.
I'm Peter from the Daily Rios, and this is episode 15 of Eric and Peter's Legion Project Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 15 of the Legion Project Podcast. I'm your host, Peter.
And I am Eric.
And we are here to talk Legion once again. Welcome, Eric. How are you?
Good. How are you, Peter? How's the winter treating you?
I'm done with it.
You and me both.
I'm going to... how dare Polar Boy get into this book just now, because all he does is give me a reminder that I'm done with winter. In fact, this issue was, you could say it was a nice, I was like, I can't wait. I can't wait till I'm burning.
Yeah, a respite from the freezing cold.
Right, yeah.
So to speak.
So we don't have much at the top here to talk about. We are continuing on. This is year 2 of the Baxter run. But we do have a couple things that we want to remind our listeners about. The next episode that you will hear will not be a regular Legion Project podcast. It'll be our second Tales of the Legion Project podcast, taking a look at Legion of the Superheroes Annual Number 1. And on the cover it says, "Who Shot Laurel Kent?" So this is the first annual for the Baxter run, and it's taking a look at a subplot that's been going on for a while now, and finally finishing that up. And because it is outside of the normal numbering, we're going to throw that into a Tales episode. Our first one covered the Legion of Substitute Heroes special, and if you haven't heard that yet, you should, because it's actually still playing out within the actual Legion book, oddly enough. But our next one will be on the first annual, so definitely looking forward to that.
Peter, I can't wait to reveal some information about that particular story in terms of something I read in the Legion companion book.
Oh, cool. A
question is asked of Paul Levitz regarding the specific plot, and his answer is just hilarious. It's very short. The build up to this that I'm doing right now is probably much more than the actual quote itself, but I find it so funny, so I can't wait to talk about that.
Great. So we get to dip into our supplemental podcast format, which is awesome. If you sent us any feedback about the Legion of Substitute Heroes special episode, we will read it on that episode. And if you haven't sent us feedback because you haven't listened to it yet, you certainly still have time. Or if you want to give us thoughts on the annual, you can also do that as well. And you can send those thoughts to peter@thedailyrios.com
or you can send it to me at longboxreview@gmail.com. Peter, we did get some feedback for episode 14. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to do the other announcement first?
Let's do the feedback. Let's keep them waiting for a little bit.
So, real quick, this is from Chris. He sent a quick note our way regarding episode 14 or issue 14. He said, "I bought this issue off the rack as a kid and was just bowled over with all these new Legionnaires. Too bad many of them didn't do much moving forward," which, spoilers, Chris, for me. Funny they have Energy Lad front and center on the cover when he just gets embarrassed and dropped like a hot rock in this issue. And we talked about that in that episode, too.
I don't know if I necessarily agree. Well, I mean, this issue, he's right. But I don't know if I agree with that in its extremity of what he said, but we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see as we go.
Well, I'm as I've said many times now, this is new territory for me. So I'm actually very much looking forward to seeing how those new characters fare in the book, especially after issue 15. But I'll get to that in a minute.
Is that it for the feedback?
Yeah, that's everything I have.
Okay, good. Short and sweet. So let's announce our contest winner.
Woohoo!
I took your suggestion. I didn't announce it on Twitter. I decided to just wait until the episode, just to keep the suspense going. And which one of who actually picked the name?
Oh, Madison did.
Who is Madison, in case they don't know?
Oh, sorry. So let me back up just for a second. So Peter had this great idea of taking all the names, all the contest people, and letting one of my girls pick out the name out of a hat, literally. So that's what I did. Wrote all the names down, put them in a hat, mixed them all up, and then had Madison, who is my comic book reading granddaughter, and she's been on my show a few times, talking about comics and conventions and all that good stuff. And so I had her pick the name out of the hat, and
the winner is Ryan Lowry.
Congratulations.
Yeah. He emailed me through one of the old Daily Rios episodes last year, and mentioned that he's relatively new to the comics hobby. I don't necessarily know, the time frame on that, but I thought that was cool. And then he also put his name in for the contest, so he wins the Volume 1 trade paperback of Legion of Superheroes Eye for an Eye, collecting the first 6 issues of this Baxter run. And Ryan, if you're hearing this, send me your mailing address so I can ship the book out to you. And the good thing about having Madison pick the names is nobody can be mad at us if they didn't win.
That's right.
So, so that was cool. Congrats to Ryan. Nice and short, simple contest. And as I said, I'll get that out to him, and once he gets it, hopefully he enjoys his prize.
I mean, and that's kind of perfect too. If he's a newer comic book reader, having this first volume of the series, that's a good way to get introduced to the Legion, at least this form of the Legion.
Yeah, I think it's a good opening arc. A lot of people always say, "Oh, if you want to get into the Legion, go read the Great Darkness Saga." It's like, no, whoa, slow your roll. No, that's a little too much.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of characters in those first, in the Eye for an Eye storyline, but it's still, good versus evil. You can understand that. So, we'll have to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. Ryan, so you got to let us know what you think of that particular trade.
Yeah.
Should we get into the issue itself?
I guess that means we do, whether we want to or not.
Ooh. This might be a fun conversation then.
Yeah, look, we've both been dropping hints.
Yeah. All right. Shall we get into it then?
Let's do it.
All right. Issue 15, Hostage on a Hostile Star. Gotta love that alliteration. Written by Paul Levitz, always. However, we have a new penciler here, Greg LaRocque. LaRocque? Or how do you pronounce that, Peter?
It is from a video I found on YouTube from the man himself, Greg LaRocque.
Oh, okay, LaRocque?
LaRocque, yeah.
Okay.
Like row your boat, LaRocque.
Okay, so Greg LaRocque is now the penciler on this series. Larry Malstad is continuing as inker, as well as John Costanza on letters, and Carl Gafford as color. So we at least get some continuity here. as things change on this book, and Karen Berger is or continues to be the editor. The cover, however, is by Steve Lytle and Larry Malstead. So what is this issue about? New Legion artist, as I said, Greg LaRocque, makes a splash page with fan fave Wildfire. However, more on that later as we go to a Legion operation beyond Imskian space, where Shadowlass and Sunboy and some other Legionnaires are saving Imsk from space dragons, which I thought was just a cool Silver Age thing to throw in there. Element Lad does his best Starfleet command to Captain Kirk imitation by sending the Imskian team to rescue the abducted new recruits because they're the closest members. Meanwhile, Timberwolf, along with Sensei and Mig, visits Shanghala so that Timberwolf can talk to Karate Kid's gravestone and remind us what he accomplished just a few issues ago. And at the uncharted system where Wildfire and the newbies were attacked, a solar flare grabs Mon-El and pulls him toward a nearby asteroid. The Legion cruiser soon follows. Wildfire, Dawnstar, and other Legionnaires head off to help. Element Lad ponders if Dreamgirl's suggestion to him has merit, and he and Starboy are worried about having so many new members all at once. Maybe he should have thought of that before. Back on the asteroid, the Legion soon discovers that behind the grabby solar flares is none other than Dr. Regulus and some flame-based aliens who have, for some reason, decided to help him and move the plot along. And they've taken a liking to him. Sunboy challenges Regulus to a duel. This is sounding very familiar. In Metropolis, we have a short interlude with Cosmic Boy and Night Girl as they help dedicate the former Legion and Legion of Substitute heroes, their Rocket HQ, as a superhero museum. And we discover, weirdly, that Night Girl is a bit unnerved at all the attention from the crowd. From the Legion cruiser, the Legion members await the outcome of the fight between the two fiery foes. Unlike their last encounter, right doesn't make might, as Regulus this time mops the floor with Sunboy. That is until Sunboy gets creative and uses his flight ring to render Regulus unconscious. And the issue ends with a melancholy Brainiac 5 muttering about an impending death that happened 1,000 years ago. I'm more intrigued about that final page than I think just about anything else in this issue.
Yeah. I think we can probably take away that this wasn't one of our favorite issues.
No. My problem with it is, as I was reading this issue, I very clearly had in the back of my head the issue of the pre-Baxter run of the Legion of Superheroes, issue number 286, which is a fight between Sunboy and Dr. Regulus, which was only 3 years prior.
Right.
And it's not like, they constantly recycle through the villains of the Legion. I mean, that just happens in the superhero books. It's a trope, but it's basically the same thing with a little bit of window dressing on it. And that's what really bothered me, considering that that issue was also written by Paul Levitz.
Who was the artist on that? Was it Broderick?
I believe, yes, it is Pat Broderick.
Do you have any background info from the Legion Companion on this issue? Is it too early to go there right away?
Not regarding the story itself. I have some information about LaRocque and why he came onto the book and stuff like that. But
because we know that Lido left. We talked about it last episode, that the demands of his artwork versus the demands of a monthly comic, it was just getting to be too much. Right. And they even reference it in, it's either this letter column or the letter column about this issue.
I think you're right, yes.
Right, where they said his production schedule was 6 weeks, but they needed a book to be done in 4 weeks. So it just wasn't working out anymore. Knowing that, and he even said, he probably should have fought a little harder to stay on the book, because he did enjoy being on the book. But he just took that as, okay, well then I guess that's what I'm just going to do covers, or whatever. So you have that aspect about the art. And then as I'm sure you read also in that letter column about this issue, the script for this issue apparently was written after issue 16's script.
Yeah, that was kind of weird.
Then you also factor in that, I'm sure this is in your companion book. I read it on an interview and also in that YouTube interview, or I'm not sure if it's on the YouTube interview, but it's in another interview I read with Greg LaRocque. And it's kind of mentioned in the little bio they do for the letter column about this issue, which is from the Baxter issue number 20, where Greg called up Karen Berger, or called up DC and Karen Berger, and said, I want to do a book. And she just handed him a script. So, and it was a Legion. It was a Legion script. Part of me wonders, did they know that, because issue 16 is also drawn by Steve Lytle, did they know he was going to be delayed with that issue? So that was supposed to be issue 15, so they kind of quickly inserted this issue. And that's why it's, number one, a new artist. Number two, it feels like it should come after. It doesn't feel like it should have come after issue 14.
Right.
And there's some just some choppiness to it. It's a very transitional story in both story and craft. And just because I know that Steve Lytle draws the next issue, I just wondered, did they flip-flop this? I don't know, because it's I'm not taking anything away from Greg's artwork, but I just feel like if this was a script that was meant for Steve Lytle, is that why it feels lacking in some places? Like maybe, Paul and Steve had conversations about each issue or about what they were going to do. So even if Levitz is writing a full script of some sorts, I'm sure Lytle might have had it in his mind. Oh, I can't wait to draw that fight between Sunboy and Dr. Regulus. We're going to put all this in, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to fill in the gaps where the script is, where Paul has sort of let me, maybe Paul had some empty spaces that Steve was going to finish, right? But if you get a new artist that wasn't in on that collaborative talk and he's just drawing the script, is that why it feels lacking in some places? So this is all just speculation based on the few facts that we have about it. But that's what I kind of took away from it. It felt unfinished in some ways.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. It sounds very much like Levitz and Lytle probably had a plan, and then because of the shift and the change, bringing LaRocque in, then things didn't quite get translated as perhaps intended. And Paul Levitz does in that letter column in issue 20, where he talks about, he got some feedback from a letter column writer about the disjointedness. He says, your criticisms of the story's opening are well taken, and other readers commented on the disjointed feeling. And that's where he mentioned the fact that 15 was written after 16, and that we simply blew the opening for issue 15. So he's trying to take some credit for the poor quality, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good word, disjointed. It's not that it's poorly constructed. It just was an awkward read. Especially considering this is the first issue of the Baxter run that I read in real time back in the 80s. So I was kind of jonesing for it. I was like, ooh, I can't wait to get to this. This is it, right? Like, this is it. This is, my coupon kicked in for my subscription. I would read this issue. I would go collect the back issues shortly thereafter. I was all caught up, more or less. It's interesting to me that the first regular Legion title issue that I read was 304, featuring the Academy on the cover. And then I read this issue, and it has the newbies on the cover. So it's not even that, that I necessarily was immersed into the Legion world on both aspects, which is kind of interesting. It's why the Steve Lytle run isn't as forefront in my mind, because, the first Baxter run issue I read was the LaRoque issue, the first LaRoque issue. So that's kind of cool. Now I've come to realize how just important and strong the Lytle run really was, and now I'm a big fan of it. So I was all excited, and then I was a little let down. Gotta say.
So how, since you brought this up, coming into this, and this is, so issue 15 was your first of the Baxter,
mm-hmm.
right? And so you're reading this, and you didn't have anything, any knowledge of what came before this issue?
I think I did. I think I knew about the Legion of Superheroes versus Legion of Supervillains, and I do think because the Tales was already reprinting that story, at least by what we're up to, like the third issue of the reprints. So I guess I don't have my exact notes of I'd have to go back into my record books to see if I was writing down what I was buying at this time, because I think I started my record book notation in like 1985, 1986. So I don't know if I'm this early just yet. But I know that I was familiar with the war, with the battle. But everything in between, I wouldn't know until like I said, shortly thereafter. Once the coupon kicked in and I went, oh, it's starting at issue 15. Oh crap, I got to go back and get the other ones. So I would get them, and read them, and as we talked about before. So coming into this, this definitely was the first time I met a lot of these characters: Tellus, Quizlet, Censor Girl. But I was certainly familiar with the Legion, but not those specific characters, I guess.
So you see on the cover of issue 15 here, those new members, and some of whom you just mentioned, featured very prominently, and then you start reading the issue, and we get very little of them. Yeah. So do you remember what maybe your response to that was?
Probably it didn't matter. It didn't hit me the way it did this time around because I didn't know what the previous issue was about. So
of course, yeah.
Maybe there was a battle previously, because as you just mentioned, the story starts in just the middle of an action sequence, so more or less. So I think I was much more forgiving back then as a kid, because I was just like, ooh, comics in the mail, and and just I was finally getting to read the second Legion book, and it didn't hit me in the way that it did reading it this time, where I was just like, what the heck? That's not what I remembered from this book. As I was reading it and getting to it, and I'm like, where's the recruits? Oh my God, they really are hostages. So, but then to know that the next issue blurb says, oh, we're going to, focus on the recruits, I was like, well, that's what you should have done this issue.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming off of 14, where the focus was so much on the new characters. Tellus, Quizlet, well, really just Tellus and Quizlet. A little bit of Polar Boy, virtually nothing of Censor Girl, and so that sets up in your mind, at least for me, that there's going to be something with these characters in the next issue. I mean, and as you said, they basically said that, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to this, and they're basically not even in the story. I mean, they're there, but they're worth nothing to the story at all, except as pawns in this battle between Regulus and Sunboy.
Yeah,
it was very disappointing.
Yeah, let's go to the covers first. Let's talk about something positive, and then we can continue back, because I have thoughts about what you said too. So the covers, both of them by Lytle, both of them featuring Dr. Regulus in some form or another. The Baxter focusing on the 5 new recruits as captives, and the Tales issue from Tales 340 featuring a riff on the battle between Regulus and Sunboy. So, do you have a favorite?
This one was a little harder. Okay, so the Baxter cover, I love the construction of it.
Yeah,
I love the colors. The flames all around. I like how Regulus is front and center as the bad guy of the issue, and I like how the new recruits are struggling, trying to get out of this. Looks like they're inside of a fire sphere or whatever. So it's very dynamic and it's very colorful. But it basically has nothing to do with the story itself, because it features the recruits on the cover, and like I said, they're barely in the story. So from a storytelling standpoint, this cover does not work. Like you said, on the Tales cover, issue 340, we do get a better sense of there's a conflict between these two characters, and the cover clearly shows that. But I find the whole Sunboy chained to what looks like a miniature sun or a fireball or whatever it is you want to call it, kind of hokey. So, but I will say, at least on this cover, Sunboy's Legion flight ring you can clearly see that, and that gave it another, pushed it up one notch for me because of what happens in the story.
Oh, right, sure. Uh-huh.
But I have to say I prefer the Baxter cover more, despite its flim-flammery, trying to sell us something that isn't there.
I mean, to be fair, they are captives in the story.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. As if you just take them as covers without the story inside, I think they're both good. I think they're both worthy. They're dynamic as covers, but they do have some story elements in itself, not even relating to the inside, just as covers themselves. The Tales one, because it has Sunboy on it, and I feel like he's a character that really hasn't had much coverage. No pun intended, but I mean, like just in the Baxter run itself. It's not like he's been a focus point for a while.
That's true.
So, yeah, so it was kind of nice that he got a cover. I certainly like the new recruits one because we just got introduced to them, so that's kind of a nice selling point, at least. If you're going to use them, you might as well use them on the cover, and they do get used quite a lot here and there. So I think I'm good on both. I mean, I totally agree with what you said about the covers matching the interiors too, but I think they both kind of work. I don't know if I really even have a favorite. I could go back and forth, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I totally see that. I like I said, I was wish-washy about it at first.
Yeah.
So yeah, both covers have merits for sure, which is unusual because it doesn't usually go that way for me. I usually have a very clear winner in this competition that we have between covers.
There are two things though two other points about these covers that I wanted to mention and see what you thought. Well, the first one is on issue 15, since they always put the credits on the cover, and we see Greg LaRocque. I don't know this because I wasn't reading at the time, but I just have to wonder if people were reading this as it was being released and they got from 14 to 15, did they kind of look at that and go, who? What? Wait, who? Because, like I said, it wasn't announced in the previous issue that they were going to have a new artist. So that probably was an interesting... I imagine that had to be an interesting factor to somebody. Just a new name completely out of the blue.
Well, I was trying to remember back then if that was a common... I mean, not necessarily with the Legion book itself, but just generally speaking at DC Comics, was that a common thing where we would just suddenly get a random issue drawn by somebody different than the person who is on the book, more or less regularly?
Yeah, I can remember fill-ins here and there.
Yeah. So even though I wasn't reading this particular title at the time that it was coming out, I think my reaction would have been, this is just a fill-in. But then as we get down the road, we do well. And if you read the introduction here, or the introduction of Greg LaRocque in the letter column in the back of the issue, then it becomes a lot more clear what they're doing.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. That's in the later issue. Issue
right.
20.
That's in issue 20. Yeah, they don't even mention it.
That's right. Yeah. So right. Yeah. From this standpoint, it's just a fill-in guy, we think.
Right. And then the second thing is knowing that Steve Lytle left last issue, and in the reprints that are running concurrent to issue 15, like I said, they're only up to issue 3 of the reprint. He doesn't start taking over the cover reign. He doesn't start taking over doing covers for the Tales until issue 5, I think it is, the reprint for issue 5. So, we're doing a comparison between these two covers, but obviously the second cover doesn't come out for another year yet. So I have to imagine what he must have felt knowing, I'm no longer on the interiors, but I'm being assigned, or maybe I asked to be on the covers. So he at least has some connection to this run that he just did. I wonder what he felt like. I wonder what he felt like knowing that he was no longer going to be on the interior, but, he's still got to work. And I believe he's doing... Well, no, Doom Patrol doesn't come out for a while yet. So he's on the covers. He takes over as cover artist for the Tales book. And he still does a few covers for the Baxter run, too. So I just have to wonder what he's going through at this point, knowing that he's no longer doing the interiors.
Well, he does talk about, in the companion book and elsewhere, like you mentioned, he did regret his youthful decision and not being willing to, as he was seeing it, compromise his artistic integrity. And I'm very much paraphrasing here, but in hindsight, he regretted that decision.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how long after this decision did that regret hit him, and but at least he had some connection by doing these covers that were coming out, a year later or whatever.
Do we want to? You want to talk about the issue? You want to talk about Greg LaRocque? Where do you want to go next?
Since we're talking about the art, let's jump to the Greg LaRocque stuff that I gleaned from the companion book and elsewhere. I was actually listening to a different podcast. It's called Eating the Fantastic, because the host of the show was interviewing Paul Levitz, and as I was listening to this, Paul referenced this very issue and this situation between the artists Lytle and LaRocque, which was just a wonderful happenstance because I was just listening to this on Friday, Peter, and yesterday, as we record, it's the following day. So, or no, I'm sorry. Oh boy, my days are all screwed up. This is Sunday, so it's 2 days ago that I was listening to this. So it was just a weird convergence of things. So so let's talk about that. You already mentioned how LaRoque contacted Karen Berger. What you didn't mention, I think, was apparently Jim Shooter over at Marvel, because LaRoque was doing Web of Spider-Man, and Jim Shooter wanted a different look, a different visual look for the book, I guess, and so he basically fired LaRoque off of Web of Spider-Man, and that's when LaRoque called up Karen Berger and got assigned this issue for Legion. Also, LaRoque in the Legion Companion was talking about how Paul did full scripts for a while with him, and then once they got comfortable, I guess, with each other, Paul started giving LaRoque plots instead, so just like Paul did with Steve Lytle, so that he could flex his artistic muscles. Greg could. And it also mentioned that Greg would do half the issue in 2 weeks and the other half the following 2 weeks, so that there's that whole 4-week versus 6-week situation between LaRoque and Lytle. And like I said, finally, the thing I mentioned about the podcast, Paul referred to LaRoque as less innovative, a less innovative artist, but a great soldier. And that's a quote. So he basically, LaRoque would draw whatever Paul needed for the book. And I thought, wow, that's. I guess I can totally agree with Paul's assessment based on what I'm seeing here in this issue so far. But I thought that was very interesting that he referred to his collaborator on this book as being less innovative as his predecessor. I mean, which is true based on what we have experienced. I think we would agree with that assessment at this point, right, Peter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. But still, that's kind of a slap in the face.
Well, let me piggyback on some of that because it was kind of nice to learn some things about Greg LaRoque that I hadn't learned, that I didn't know before. So just some dry facts here. He was born February 24th, 1954, so he just celebrated his 65th birthday last month. Always wanted to be a comic artist as a kid. Legion of Superheroes apparently was one of his favorite books to read. He began his career on a Mystery in Space issue. He did some backup tales in Warlord on OMAC, which is kind of interesting because I'm actually collecting those backup tales, and I didn't know that those were drawn by him, so that's cool. He did a pretty good run on Power Man and Iron Fist over at Marvel. As you mentioned, he did Web of Spider-Man. He did the first 4 issues and then inked John Byrne for issue number 5. And from that video interview that I saw, Jim Shooter told him that he wanted LaRoque to draw a little more in the Kirby style or Kirby house style. Not necessarily maybe not to ape Kirby, but just sort of that dynamic thing, that house style that him and Buscema and all those other people were doing, And LaRoque said no. And then that's why he was fired. He said he was shown the door.
Wow, okay. Yeah, he didn't mention that little tidbit in that interview in the companion book.
Yeah. When he said it in the video interview, he kind of said, I'll just put it out there. This is what happened. He stated in a 2013 interview, I decided to leave Marvel for personal reasons. We know why. And the first person I called was Karen Berger. We mentioned this. She handed me the next available Legion script, and the day I handed in the work, she offered me the book. That's pretty amazing. And then also to touch on what you said about the innovative versus, being a soldier. I mean, I agree that Steve Lytle to the Legion was like Perez to New Teen Titans. It was so detailed. It's not necessarily the definitive look for the Legion, but he definitely created his own version and his own mark. And it is a little, when you get into the LaRocque stuff, it's some of the pages, the page layout's a little wider, panels are wider. There's not a lot of detail in the technology side of it. The aliens are different looking, but they're not as definitive as Lido would do with the background aliens. He would really just create some interesting people and some interesting character designs. It's going to take some getting used to the way LaRocque draws some of the Legion, some of their faces, some of the anatomy. I do like a lot of the big splash pages that he brought onto the book. I love that shot of Shadowlass. I think that's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I saw the first splash page of Wildfire, I thought, it's not that he's similar to Lido, but it didn't feel as different. But it's, as you go in, it's different. It is different artwork. I don't think it's a complete opposite to what Lido was doing, but it's certainly not within the same wheelhouse. But it's not as jarring as maybe like when who did the Joe Orlando, when he did issue number 6 or whatever that was. It's different, but it's, luckily it's not so different. It's just not what we're used to. I think that's really what I could say about it. It's just not what we're used to, or what I'm used to.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, the aspect of familiarity, I also thought there were some many panels in this book where it was almost like we were looking at Ernie Cologne's art for Legion as well. I can see hints, or I could see similarities anyway.
I think the biggest takeaway from looking into Greg's biography and background is to discover, which I had no idea, that he's Asian American. He is at least, I think, I don't think he's full, but because he has pictures. I found his MySpace page. And he has pictures of his family and his pictures of his work, and he has some really nice Legion pinups, which I'll need to send you the link and so you can see them, and maybe we'll put it on our show notes too. Some like commission work that he did. So he has pictures of his mother. She looks American. Maybe his father is, he's Filipino. He's part Filipino. I had no idea. When you look at the letter column from issue 20 of the Baxter run, and he draws himself with the Legion, like in that little thing where the Legion are kind of like crawling out of the page while he's sleeping. He doesn't look Filipino there. Mm-hmm. But in the interview that I saw, there's another interview where he worked on a anthology for Asian American creators. He's Asian American, and I was like, that is shocking to me. I did not know that at all. And it also goes back to, it's a little bit of a tangent, but one of my other favorite books at this time was Justice League during the Detroit era, with art by Chuck Patton, who I really liked at the time. And only found out through, I think, the DC Challenge book at that time, where he actually drew himself, where he was an African American. So you have George Perez on Titans. You have Greg LaRocque, who, for me, was the Legion artist after Keith Giffen. You have Chuck Patton. You have all these representative artists that at the time, other than George Perez, I didn't know. I knew George Perez was Latino back then. So it kind of makes me wonder, he did in the interview say, I didn't really bring any of the Filipino culture into my artwork, but on some level it's probably, if he's, I think he was friends with Nudi Nebrez and some other, creators out of Marvel that came out from the Filipino invasion, what they called the Filipino invasion. I have to wonder if some of it probably spilled in, maybe some influence or whatever. But I think he was born in Maryland. I think he was born here. I'm not certain. But I just thought that was a fascinating thing to discover.
Well, yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah.
That either him or the Chuck Patton thing. So
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah, and to know that he is, maybe this is a spoiler for you, but he will be on the Legion book for just shy of 3 years, uninterrupted. So that's a pretty great run. And then he goes on to do the Flash for almost 5 years.
Right.
So
and that's actually where I knew him then. Back in that day. That's where I was familiar with his work was the Flash title.
Right. And maybe it's because I am Puerto Rican, but I just feel it's important to note these kind of things because I think we sort of wash over some of that kind of historical knowledge in an art form that is predominantly not, built on creators of ethnicity. So, I mean, I guess that's false because Siegel and Schuster were Jewish, but in this time frame, that info never seemed to come out, and I just think it's important to know. It's important to know. Doesn't take away that like I said, the issue still is was a little bit of a disappointment, but not because he's Asian American, obviously.
No.
Just because it just was, like on some level. But just on the other hand, I do know that out of this, especially since he's the artist that I followed, this was it. I just knew, I certainly became a fan of his artwork, even if it's not the most polished or, as Levitt said, he's a soldier. He's sort of creating these books in his style as a job, as a necessity. I mean, it's not like he didn't like doing it, but it's just different. It's very different.
Yeah, and I don't have any major complaints with his work. It's just not Lytle. I think he does a good enough job depicting the Legionnaires and the action and he I don't know if it was him or the colorist, but they threw in a lot of Kirby crackle in there, which was kind of cool because of all the sun connections. The only real complaint I will make of this is that, and again, I don't know, is this the inker or is this LaRocque himself? But the faces all kind of seem the male faces of the Legionnaires all kind of seem the same for the most part.
Yeah.
But other than that, I know it's a pretty damn good, pretty damn well drawn comic.
Yeah, he has some interesting uses of like anatomy. I think some of his anatomy, the neck, some weird leg twists. That's just in my eye, I'm just thinking, all right, I just got to get used to it again, especially because we're coming off of Lytle.
Yeah, everybody has the same chin, basically. Now I'm nitpicking, but.
And I don't want to start it that way. Like it's I don't want to say that it's always in comparison to Lytle. I just, as I said before, was so shocked at how much I loved those Lytle issues, and how I just never really knew. I didn't know what kind of impact he had on the book until we started doing this podcast. So it's just unfortunate that it doesn't continue. But we are on a new path, and that's where we'll go.
So we mentioned how people reacted to this issue as being disjointed, and I don't know if they were kind of going off like the first page, which is this I thought was a great kind of it's not really technically a splash page, but just a great first page of the issue, because we start in the middle of something. I mean, which is a common literature fiction device,
right? And
we get this great heroic pose of Wildfire. Like I said in the synopsis, this Wildfire has long been one of the fan favorites of the book, and here he is being his surly self as he inhabits another one of his costumes, because something has happened. Even he said, the first words in this issue is "stupid, helpless brats." To help, I think I helped pick them. So referring to the new recruits. So I think Dirk is just more displeased because he had to go through the process of coming back to Earth and getting a new suit than anything else.
That is a pretty great transition now that I think about it, though. You go from the hope and the potential and the very rah-rah Legion splash page from the previous issue, the last page, right? And then the first thing you read after that is stupid, about the brat line. Like, that is pretty funny.
It totally undercuts where we left off in the last issue, which I thought was a nice way to set the tone, I guess, to shake things up.
Is this information new on page 2 about every time he gets a new suit, his anti-energy works differently? Is that new?
Thank you for that. I had that in my notes too. And so I was going to ask you about this because I don't recall, other than his first appearance in the book where he had all these amazing powers, I don't recall him actually exhibiting anything different than what we're seeing in this issue. Basically just, he has these energy blasts and he can fly on his own power, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a weird thing to point out. And so what it made me, because like I said, I can't recall that being any different in the past. So what I was thinking was perhaps in the future, are we going to start seeing that? And this is Levitz's way of queuing that up for us.
Right. Which he's been doing for a while. We've talked about this before, where he's throwing in little personality things, little power things here and there that maybe never see the light of day, but it's at least his way of saying, look, these characters shouldn't have the same personalities. Maybe their power sets could stretch a little bit. And I thought that was kind of interesting for Wildfire especially. If he's composed of anti-energy, well, what the heck is that, right? And it probably could be anything he wanted it to be, and they referenced Legion of Superheroes 283, which I think I might have read way, 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 way back, but it's an origin story for Wildfire by Roy Thomas, of all people, Howard Bender. And it adds, I guess, some new information to the Wildfire origin. But that's the first time I saw the thing that you just referenced, that the first time he got the containment suit, he could do like a whole bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I never knew that before.
Yeah, he was like a combination of several Legionnaires at that point.
Yeah. And maybe it's just Levitt's way of saying, look, he's stuck in this suit. We got to give him something. We got to give him, and I kind of know where we are going to go on one element of it later. But I didn't know if that was a fact that hardcore Legion fan might know, or maybe that's, as you said, maybe it is just something new for here on out.
And I like on page 2, at that top panel where we see 4 additional Wildfire suits in the background. And Wildfire does make the comment about, maybe one day Brainy can mass produce these suits so I can have consistent powers, like you said. But the suits are all a little bit different from each other. And that doesn't, from as a fan, seeing different costumes and whatnot, and we will, sometimes the artists will change up how a character looks, and that's always interesting in and of itself. But I know I'm being really picky here, but in story, does Brainiac 5 seem like the kind of person who would take artistic license in producing these suits for Wildfire, or would he just make the same suit over and over and over? And I do know that down the road, because I've seen this in later issues where I actually came back into the Legion in the Baxter run, that Wildfire does get a different look that LaRocque had designed.
Right. I think that's what I was referencing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do get some different things, some creative license with Wildfire in particular. And then since we're talking about these kind of off the cuff comments or oddball comments, at the bottom of that page he says something as he's flying through the Legion headquarters after getting his suit. He goes through this room, I guess, and he just makes this comment about, we must have the arrest reports from everything back to the Legion's first case down here somewhere. That just seemed like a really weird thing for him to say, because it has no bearing on this story.
I wondered if it was maybe a continuation of just the new headquarters and Computo, and it feels like maybe they took the new headquarters for granted, even though we've had it now for a long time, at least a year, I think, or more. Well, yeah, definitely more than a year. Do they really know what is all in the new headquarters yet? I mean, maybe somebody like Wildfire would be one that would you would think he'd be one that would go through every nook and cranny, but that was the only sort of takeaway I could give, especially because we got Computo back again, and he always pops up at random times. And I don't know. I don't have any basis of evidence for this, and I don't think it plays out later, but I just kind of felt like Levitz is just being silly with the headquarters a little bit.
I think that's a good way to put it. I think sometimes he just kind of throws things in, just, I don't know, to play with us, to relieve some boredom. I'm not sure what he's doing, because if we don't get something relating to that down the road, then what was the point? It was just wasted conversation. I mean, I guess other than, like you say, to kind of, in some minor way, build up the universe, so to speak.
Right.
I don't know. It's if that's the case, it's a little too subtle for my taste.
Well, along those lines, and you referenced it in the synopsis, and I again, my faulty Legion knowledge, or just I haven't read anything about it. This whole thing with the dragons and Imsk. Once I researched it, I went, oh, that is part of like Imsk history. This whole thing about dragons and the radiation from their scales, helping to provide them with, I guess, their ability to shrink in some way or another. While I always appreciate and I like when the Legion goes off and they just do these random like humanitarian jobs, or just like, hey, some planet is in need of a new whatever. That I always dig that. I think that's kind of cool. It's, they're used not just for defense, but then I was like, what? There's dragons part of what's going on here?
Yeah, I didn't know that about the Imskians. Now that you've said that, that kind of rings a very tiny bell in the back of my brain, but when I was reading this, I certainly didn't remember it. But what a great, you mentioned this before about Shadowlass on page 3, that great splash page of her and Sunboy opposite her on the other end of the page there, really displaying their abilities. I thought that was really cool, and it seems like I made some comment before, or I had something in my notes before in a previous issue about Shadowlass and her abilities. It seems like that Levitz was trying to expand her abilities or make her a little more powerful than just being able to create darkness. And we see this on full display here in this issue, and I thought it was really cool because she is blocking a sun, a sun's light. I mean, from a cosmic standpoint, that is amazing that she's able to do this.
I mean, they should be the very, very top, the zenith of whatever it is their power set is, right? To be a member of the Legion, you would think that they would have the most skill at it. And she certainly does, because she's the planetary champion of her planet, all that. And it's also interesting to note on the next page where Sunboy says, look, I don't have that kind of refinement with my powers to just pick a random frequency or whatever it is, I can't narrow my wavelengths. But to know that he also is someone who has, incredible power with what it is that he can control.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like that about the character, or that's something I always feel about the Legion, is that they should be the best at what it is, whatever it is that they have. In this whole sequence, once we get past the dragon stuff, and then they are told to go rescue the recruits, and right away they argue, they debate, they argue. Who's to say that if some experienced Legionnaires were also on that same mission, if they wouldn't have been caught with their pants down, or in the trap, or Colossal Boy saying maybe they should have joined the Legion Academy. Sunboy being the more tolerant one, surprisingly, and saying, well, look, there's a lot of ways to train people. And this is a theme that goes on throughout this issue, this idea of maybe we don't get to see the recruits in action, but we certainly are seeing what the Legionnaires think, the more established Legionnaires, what they think of the recruits. And it made me go back to issue number 8, where Cosmic Boy was talking to Night Girl, and he is talking about how he has plans about, whatever it is that he wanted to do at that time. And we came to realize eventually that he was going to leave the team. Saturn Girl was going to leave the team. Lightning Lad was going to leave the team. They were going to be these senior members. He was always talking about new blood. And one of the bits of dialogue from issue 8 was he was talking about the team in general. They need something to shake them up, to change things around here. And while discord maybe isn't the thing that you want in your team, or arguing or whatever, this issue showed that is all they can talk about, and soon enough they're going to be talking about yet another thing or a mystery or whatever. But it did make me think, when you go back to some of the earlier issues, as a whole, the different team members were going off on all these different missions, and I'm talking outside of like the first 5 issues. They had random missions, or they were just sitting around talking to each other, or they would comment about all these different things. Every now and then they might have something that made them all talk, whether it was the election, or the Trinity leaving. But now here's a whole thing that if we had to have something that was like the glue narratively, it's about the recruits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we both mentioned in the previous episode where we were like, okay, you can't stick 5 new characters on a team without the book changing somehow. And I feel like this might be that change. And if we want to connect it to Cosmic Boy, again, I don't think that's exactly what he had in mind, but he did say, we need something to shake them up. So I kind of liked that about this issue, that we got several bits of dialogue about that. And I'm curious to see how that plays out in later issues. This whole notion of this is the thing that it kind of makes everybody look inward again. And maybe that was Cosmic Boy's point. That everybody was focused on all these other things. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, that sounds very, very logical. What isn't logical to me is, and I always go back to in-story stuff, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to bring in these new people and not have them at least go through some sort of training before they just go off on a mission, right? To Colossal Boy's comment, we should have sent those kids to the academy first, at least, do something. And I was trying to remember, as you were talking, when they introduced Invisible Kid, that's a similar situation where a new member joined. It was a particular situation with the rebirth of Computo, but I thought I remember reading that he did do some accelerated training before he was just thrown into some Legion mission. And I'm like, why aren't they doing that with the new kids here in this? And it seems perhaps like this is a convenience on Levitz's part to do exactly what you're talking about, to shake things up and get them talking about the team structure and how everybody relates to each other, and have a narrative through line like you mentioned.
Yeah, especially with the knowledge that this issue was written after next issue, which is called, the next issue is called Baptism for a number of reasons. But I mean, still, they are, at least from what I think I remember, they do get sent away on a mission next issue. But so it does kind of feel sort of backwards in that regard. But then I do have to think, okay, they are on a mission with Wildfire, who is the one that he says, I picked him, I helped train him, whatever. So I guess maybe on some level that is exactly what is being done, that they are being put out to do a mission to kind of train them together. Mm-hmm. It just went poorly.
That's very true.
Through no fault of their own.
Right. You're right. Yeah, because do we even know what that mission was? The original mission before they got captured by Regulus? Because I'm sure it was probably something very innocuous. So
yeah. I mean, the star where they're being captured, or where they were captured, they said it's an uncharted place of the United Planets, an uncharted territory. So maybe they were just on like some kind of survey mission.
Well, yeah, because it does say it's an uninhabited, uncharted system within the United Planets territory.
Right.
So yeah, what the heck were they doing? This is my biggest complaint about the issue. Not to beat a dead horse, but it seems very plot heavy, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. So it's probably not my favorite Levitz written issue.
Yeah.
Based on that. It's really just an excuse to get Sunboy and Regulus together and fight again. With a few other interludes.
And one of those interviews, the one on page 6, the whole Timberwolf thing, I guess I'm being nitpicky with this, but I was like, this should have happened before issue 14. Mm-hmm. They're going to visit Shanghala. They have Mig with them. Sensei is there. They're visiting Karate Kid, saying, hey, look, we did what we did. He stopped off at Earth first. They did the whole let's find new recruits. Then he picked up Sensei and Mig again. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense, but it was like a little capper to issue 13, but it comes an issue later.
Right.
And just another reminder that, number one, he's rich. Number two, we got a new character in Mig. I don't think necessarily the whole go to lethal and put that flower into the rock, I don't think that plays out anymore later. I don't know. But I also don't feel like it would even be necessary to revisit it again,
Right. Just the idea that it was done and the impact it could have is enough.
Yeah, and the impact that it has on Timberwolf is more interesting to me than...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the new character as well. So, this is just an interlude, although I love when Levitz does interludes like that. Mm-hmm. This one I was sort of, at the end of it, going, oh, okay. I don't know what I got from that, but okay.
Other than to wrap things up in a nice little bow for Wildfire or Timberwolf.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then after that, I mean, we get the capture of the other Legionnaires, proving Element Lad's point that even experienced Legionnaires would have had issues with that situation. So don't blame the recruits so much. I don't know. I didn't really find anything interesting in that sequence.
Outside of maybe seeing Larocque's design skills, I kind of liked, when Mon-El was pulled down to the planet. You see like little after images of himself. It's different from Lytle, but at least he's not so traditional in his panel design, his panel by panel layout. It kind of changes up every page, which can sometimes come across a little jarring. Some of his choices are like, what? But it's nice to see someone who, he's not, it's early in his career, but it's not so early in his career that the choices don't feel random. They feel like there's some thought behind it.
Yeah.
And it's probably too early to really feel what he's going to do with the Legion book, but I'm sort of like just kind of really paying attention to it, just so I can see how it grows from here.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really pay much attention to that kind of stuff because there was
because
nothing
you're so
jarring.
sad that Lytle's not on the book.
No, it reminded me a little bit of Lytle. So it's almost like LaRocque is kind of Lytle light. And so it was familiar, but still a little different, and there's nothing that really, I don't know, grabbed my attention, I guess. It could be an argument for that he's that he's doing a serviceable work on the book that because of that.
Right. And if we go back to the whole thing that he said, hey, Karen, what can I do? And she gives him a script and he's doing it. Maybe he's just doing it as like a tryout. Mm-hmm. Like, is this a script that she gave him? I mean, I from what we're reading in the Companion and elsewhere, yeah, I would think that, okay. So maybe he didn't even research, what came before it. But in his mind, once he gets the book, then he's able to kind of like dig in and go, okay, I'm going to make it mine, and here's what I'm going to do with it. But I do like the Dawn Star. If we go to the next sequence, like again, his little poses of some of these larger than life characters, they're not quite splash pages. They're just nice, almost pinup style poses for some of these characters. Dawnstar apparently is one of his favorite characters. She looks great there.
Well, and that makes sense why she's featured so prominently because she doesn't really have much to do in this story other than
right. I
think that panel. Yeah, he does a wonderful job. I commented on his wildfire on page 1. You mentioned just a minute ago the sequence with Mon-El. I mean, yeah, he does those kinds of poses, for lack of a better word, really well. It's some of his other stuff that perhaps is not as strong, but again, this is his first thing.
And then to your point, we get that Element Lad has sent off a second cruiser with all of these characters, but they never make it. Nor do they need to, but they still never make it.
Yeah.
And we got another sequence here where Dreamy once again is kind of nudging Element Lad.
Mm-hmm.
And this time, although I liked it in other previous issues, this time I was like, okay, where are we going with this? Stop.
Exactly.
Stop. She's really... That's annoying. Like,
yeah. What's her point? What's her long game here? What is she trying to get out of this? I don't understand where we're going with this. Yeah.
Especially because this is we're now into Element Lad's second term as leader, right?
Right. Yeah. It's not like he has to prove anything to the team because he's already done that.
Yeah.
Unless, the only thing I can come up with, which doesn't make sense, is that she's somehow trying to undermine him, but I don't think that's what's going on.
No.
I mean, that would have been interesting, perhaps, if that's what she was trying to do, a bit of a coup going on in Legion leadership, but I don't think that's what plays out.
And then you get Starboy coming into it, and although that conversation might be interesting between Starboy and Element Lad about Dream Girl, and then it morphs into, yet another conversation about his decisions with the recruits, it just made me go, oh, right, Starboy. He hasn't done anything either in this series to date. And I don't know if this is maybe Levitt's just like he has a checklist in some of these sort of transition issues.
I was thinking the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, like he's like, okay, what can I give? I got to touch on every single, as many as I can, members of the Legion. What can I do? Oh, I'll do this. You know, that's the only thing I could sort of think, that he just wants to make sure we know that they are all there.
Right, and so next issue he might have, Tyrock. he's not, but you know what I mean. He's gonna go through that list and go, oh, I haven't touched on this character, I haven't touched on that character. I'll just throw them in a little quick scene with so and so.
So I guess it is kind of funny what Shadowlass said a few pages earlier. Too many new members, Element Lad. We couldn't handle it. There's a little bit of meta commentary now that I think about it. But maybe it's too early to tell. I know you have thoughts about this Doc Regulus Sunboy fight, which is where we're headed. We see that the more experienced Legionnaires find that the recruits have been captive on this asteroid, well, within the asteroid. There's a lot of people doing like, Monel's like, oh, I should have looked inside the planet. I'm like, yeah, you should have. And we find that they're held captive, and it's all because Doc Regulus, once again, has a boner for Sunboy.
Oh my god, yeah.
And we get a fight, and then it wraps, and I don't know, what were your thoughts about that?
Other than the fact that it's like, good God, man, let it go. Let it go. I mean, like I said, at the beginning of this, it was like reading issue 283 again. I didn't do this, but maybe I should go back and compare the dialogue between the two characters just to see how many similarities there actually are. But the guy just, like you said, he has a boner for Sunboy for some reason, but this time, he, with the help of these fire aliens, whatever they are, that he somehow found and convinced to help him, I guess, he actually has the upper hand, from a power standpoint, but with Sunboy. And it only takes some ingenuity on Dirk's part to help defeat the guy, and which in some ways was simultaneously, well, that's, at least that's different. It's not just a contest of powers. But at the same time, it was also just kind of, that's how the guy's defeated when he had so much power to begin with here. So that part of the conflict is the least interesting to me. What I really like in relation to this conflict is Sunboy's word, a Legionnaire's word is his bond type of thing, saying, let me take care of this guy, even though, you have one of the most powerful members on the team and probably even the universe here to help take care of this. But they just go along with it. And while, again, it's this dichotomy of, on one hand it's this and on the other hand it's that, it pleases me that these people have, I guess, such an outlook for each other, with each other, this trust that an individual can be as important as a team to take care of a situation like this. But at the same time, I feel like a Shrinking Violet who's like, you guys are idiots. If you're not going to help him, I will. But then she gets stopped. And that conflict, that difference of opinion, that's to me like the meat of this story, and it's just kind of tossed in there, and then no more of it, because then the conflict ends. So I really hope we get more of this kind of division they don't need to be at each other's throats all the time and arguing all the time, because that's not fun to read. But it still allows for these characters to be characters themselves and not just be another face on the team who has this ability and gets to be spotlighted every once in a while.
I think you're right. The differences of opinion is a nice way to is sort of like a theme, I think, that we are going to see, and it does remind me of, when Terra went on to the group of New Teen Titans, all of a sudden their dynamic changed. And they even commented, at one point, somebody says, until you came along, we never fought before, and there is a degree of that happening here, especially when you have a team that is so big and is full of cliques. We talked about that before, where I say, like, the Legion is a little on a pedestal at times, and I'm starting to see that here and there, and maybe some of it is my headcanon, but some of it's not. And I want to say that that's kind of like a little bit of a, not to use the word again, but a little bit of a theme for the 5 years later Legion too, is that they got so big. Did they get too complacent? And that's why things happened the way they did. And I kind of felt that here. Let's see. My point about, or some of the questions I had about the fight between Sunboy and Doc Regulus. And by the way, I do like the way LaRocque draws his regular face, Regulus's face. He looks crazy, as he should be. Mm-hmm. I kind of dug that. I wrote, what did we learn? What did Sunboy learn? What did the Legion learn? Did we learn anything about this fight? Why was this the thing that Levitz wanted to focus on? Maybe some of the script got away from him because he was like, all right, let me put the recruits up against a well-established villain to show, number one, maybe they aren't quite ready yet, but then again, neither are the Legionnaires, because you never know what to expect. And he's not just the same old villain. He has a plan, and he has people that are helping him, creatures that are helping him. But it goes to show that, when the Legion buckles down and that they're able to defeat their villains no matter what. But then I thought, okay, if the team is really going to be hard on the 5 recruits for being captured, but yet so was Mon-El and so was the cruiser, and Mon-El didn't look inside the planet, maybe it is saying something about their own faith in their abilities and in the team itself, and that maybe they are taking some of these things for granted, and that's maybe what Levitz was going for in this script, to kind of to show that the recruits were captured. But you know what? It wasn't easy for the team either, and no matter what they might say about the recruits, this might be something that is going to be looked at from here on out, that they can't always just assume that everything's going to be easy because they are the Legion of superheroes. A little bit of headcanon on that theory, on that little speculation, but I don't know. What do you think of that?
No, that makes a lot of sense. I would agree with you that thinking about it that way does alleviate some misgivings I have about what's going on here. But again, will we see more of that? I guess will this supposition be supported by later material that we'll get?
And I'm not 100% sure that it's being supported by the issue either.
I don't. Yeah, I think that is a very tenuous allowance that we're giving Mr. Levitz here. It just seems like almost like well, we have this change up in artists. We're considering LaRocque. I better throw in something here while Lytle is working on issue 16. because he needs that extra time. So one, this is a fill-in issue, and two, it's a tryout issue. And I don't know. Perhaps this wasn't as polished as it could have been.
Right.
But because of the time frame, they had to get the issue out in a month, and so things perhaps got lost.
Right. Yeah. I really feel that's the case. Yeah. And I think our examination, not only of this issue, but of a lot of those little subplots along the way, that I'm trying to keep track of most of them, just like Chris Claremont on the X-Men, some of them may never wash out.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that may just be the nature of comic book publishing in the 80s, We're coming up on the Crisis soon, and it's going to be interjecting into this series. We're coming up on a mystery, and then we're coming up on another dedicated storyline. I feel like when it's this kind of ensemble book, and now it's the only Legion book, so you can't even split stories anymore. I just wonder if our suppositions and headcanon stuff, the danger is that stuff is going to be more interesting than the actual payoff.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing on the book's part, because that's what I think got me into being such a fan of the Legion, was that I could think about those things,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not to that degree when I was a kid, but certainly the potential was there. And I just wanted to read it because I was like, oh my God, here's something new. Here's something new. Here's something new. Who cares if it never finishes? Here's something new. Here's something new. So, I guess maybe I'll be mindful of that for myself, hopefully I don't get disappointed that none of this stuff never ends.
Well, I think I recall in the Legion Companion book that Levitz himself complained that he didn't always tie everything up like he intended. And so we probably will see some of these things not just simply fade out and never touched on again.
Right.
And we had the one interlude because it features Cosmic Boy and Night Girl. I want to touch on if we consider this, again, headcanon thing perhaps, but if we consider that this is a tryout issue, this is a fill-in issue, maybe Levitz threw this little scene with featuring, as I said, Cosmic Boy and Night Girl, just to throw as many characters in this as possible to see how LaRocque did with them, perhaps. Because I'm not sure what the point of this little scene is, other than it kind of touches on what we found out in the Substitute Legion special, because they do talk about the disbandment of the Substitute heroes, and then the historical clubhouse of the Legion is now going to be a museum. It also might be a way to transition Cosmic Boy into the miniseries that's coming, but that's still down the road, right?
His miniseries or Legionnaires 3?
His miniseries.
Yeah, that's
years away, right?
At least 1 year away.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
That's
well,
during
maybe
Legends.
Right. Okay, I'm jumping too far ahead then. Never mind.
But it could be a nod to Legionnaires 3, which is coming up shortly.
But Night Girl's not part of that, right?
No, but I think because it involves Cosmic Boy and Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad, that maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not sure. Sure.
Well, I'll be thinking of that as we get to that miniseries.
Or it could just be their vacation. I thought, didn't they say in the previous issue they were going to go to her home world for a little bit?
Yeah. So that's just, again, moving that little subplot along.
Right.
I suppose. But it seems kind of, again, this particular scene is what, for me, contributes to that whole feeling of disjointedness, because, okay, fine, the the headquarters is now a museum, whatever. Of course, you get a founding member to show up to dedicate that. Great, that makes a lot of sense. But then this whole thing with Night Girl being very uncomfortable in a crowd like this. I mean, it's not that, I don't fault her for being nervous in the crowd and all that, but the way that she reacts is a little over the top on the outside, unless this is, again, it has to do with what's the payoff down the road. Unless this is introducing some bit of characterization that we've not seen in Night Girl before that Levitz wants to add.
Because she always seemed so headstrong before.
Yeah, it's very confident. I mean, as they left, she Cosmic Boy makes a quip about her being overage, and she socks him and tells him, "Knock it off, man," and then they laugh. So I don't. It seemed like a really odd interlude, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know enough about her character. Maybe. It kind of feels like he's saying that she's just not comfortable being a hero anymore. And I don't know if that's ever been part of her personality. And the only thing I really can go on is the 5 years later stuff where she does give up being Night Girl, Mm-hmm. So I took it as kind of just another way for them to go, hey, don't forget about that special. Go buy it.
Well, now if they directly referenced it, with like a little editor's caption box or something, go buy blah blah the Legion Substitute Special, still on stands today, or whatever. I totally would buy that. I'd be okay with that. But yeah, again, I think the connection is not that strong. So again, I'm nitpicking. I'm always so negative.
Well, before we get to the last page, I did want to talk about page 18.
Yes,
the one page where we actually get the recruits and they talk about their experience and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought this actually showed them in a really interesting light. I mean, number one, it's the only real page we get of them, but it shows off their personalities in very small bits of dialogue, and I feel like it was nice to read. I was like, oh, here's a strength for Levitz. This is what I like about his books.
Yeah.
You get Tellus being the ever inquisitive one, Polar Boy being down on himself. He's someone who he also knows the Legion, right? And his response to Tellus. Sensor Girl's just off, just scanning, just sort of just off quietly. Magnetic Kid just standing there doing nothing.
He has one word. He says one word in the whole time.
Yeah. He's even he can't believe that he's part of the team. But I thought Polar Boy and Quizlet both have some really good dialogue bits. When Tellus is sort of questioning that they did all this simply on a Legionnaire's word, and Polar Boy's like, you could bet your life on that, that's right. Polar Boy would know that,
Mm-hmm.
But Quizlet, where he says, noble, but silly perhaps, that's Quizlet. That he's the commenter, right? He's going to comment on all this in a way that only he can,
right?
And
yeah, he's like Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation. He's the outsider, always commenting on the humans,
and he's not wrong in some ways. Yeah, and I love that Mon-El is like, perhaps, but you have to humor, and I guess he's going to say my colleague or something like that. That he made even Mon-El say, yeah, maybe it is a little silly, but and I think that little bit, just again, my headcanon goes back to someone trying to poke a little bit at the very concept of what the Legion of Superheroes has become. And I kind of dig that. So if that's the role he's going to play, like Guy Gardner does in Justice League International, or, you know, Hawkeye used to do in the Avengers, you know, like I'm all for it.
So what do you think about finally the introduction of Censor Girl beyond just her showing up in a panel last issue?
Right.
She actually has some dialogue here.
Yeah.
And a perhaps a bit of introduction to her abilities.
I have some leftover thoughts that Steve Lytle has about Censor Girl, and I thought I would drop him here in this issue, but I still think it's a little too early because, again, she doesn't do anything, or not majorly. But I guess the only if I didn't know anything about her, but we were trying to figure out who she is, how would she know about the temperature rising? Is it something that she senses? Is it something she's getting off of the ship? I mean, she's just staring out a window, you know.
Well, and on the first panel on that page, though, she is intently staring out of the window at the asteroid. So, you know, I presume that she is sensing something in some fashion by her statement. But you know, beyond that, there's not a whole lot there, other than, you know, the first word she says is telling Mon-El to hush. You know, if you don't know who this is, if you were reading this not knowing who this, you know, ends up becoming, and we'll talk about that down the road, but that's pretty brash for some newbie to be telling, you know, the most powerful member and one of the senior members of the team, you know, to shut up basically and pay attention to what's going on, even though they can't really see anything. Mon-El himself says the technology of those flame creatures, they're creating heat illusions, so it's hard for him to see what's going on, but yet she knows somehow.
Yeah,
I just thought that was an interesting way to introduce her. With her telling him to shut up.
Yeah, I mean, she could be saying it to the group in general because she's sort of just focused forward, so she's just hearing noise behind her. But and then she also knows that the battle has begun, or at least she's saying that it's begun. So there must be something about her power set that they're just teasing her power set. And again, I don't really want to say what Lytle has talked about just yet, but I can see backwards. I can see sort of the evidence of what he was saying. So, but I just thought it was interesting that, like you said, it's just the beginnings of who she is, but not enough to really say. I can't imagine anybody could really say, "Oh, it's this person."
Right.
Although it is interesting that you see her, like you said, facing away from us, yellow hair, blonde hair, and a red cape.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Oh, I think astute readers would have been guessing who this potentially would be based on what little we know at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I would have back then.
I had no idea. I had no idea who it was. I had no idea who to even think it could be. I didn't know who it eventually is going to be. But as I said, the creators didn't even know that at this point. So it's a mystery.
Mm-hmm. And so just to provide another point to this is, and this is something I want to pay attention to as we go forward in the letter columns as people write in and provide their guesses.
Yeah.
And so in the letter column, I think in issue 20, it appears the writer thinks that Censor Girl is Prody 2, which is an interesting guess. So I'm really curious what other guesses come along.
And then we should talk about the last page.
Ah, yes.
So what'd you have for that?
Just, I don't know. Really what I'm reacting to is the cover of the next issue, I already know what that is, and seeing how Brainiac 5 is reacting there, and that's actually an issue that I have read because of its connection to the larger DC universe, what's going on. I don't know if we want to say that explicitly now, but
it says it on the page. Check out recent issues.
It does. You're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, so considering its connection to Crisis, that's why I've read it, even though I haven't read some of these other previous issues like this one. Given how Brainiac 5 is portrayed later, and I realize I'm jumping ahead, but he doesn't seem all that upset here. He's, like I said, in the synopsis, he's melancholy, he's contemplative, but he's not devastated as he will, I think, if I remember correctly, how he will be portrayed in the next issue. But he does say, and Levitz is being intentionally coy with the dialogue here with Brainiac 5, because he's searching for some information, some piece of evidence to the contrary about the events that he's referring to. I reject the verdict of history. So perhaps he's at this point he's just simply trying to solve a problem, and that's how Brainiac 5 works. He tries to be as logical as possible in trying to solve this conundrum, and perhaps that once he realizes the futility of what he's trying to do, that's when it hits him. So this was a great way to transition to the next issue. I mean, ties directly into what is coming next, and I like I said, the connection to the Crisis. The Legion book finally gets that connection too, and so I'm very much looking forward to reading this next issue based on this tease.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of the Time Institute whenever I see it.
Oh yeah,
and we're going to get a bunch more appearances of it. And I like the whole aspect that I like that bit of DC continuity, that there's a lot of history that is lost, and the Legion often references that there's always this murkiness around late 20th century or 21st century or after that, whether it was because of a war or a crisis or whatever. And now knowing that this issue was written after next issue, it does feel a little backwards in his composure.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he does say to go in and do a little bit of tweaking, I guess.
Yeah. And he says, I'll not fall into that trap again. Well, maybe you will, because you're not as unemotional as you like to think you are.
Right. Well, and right before that, he says, "I've stared at the edge of madness too often from the far side." I don't know if I agree with that, because that is a reference to his past breakdowns where he was literally insane for a while, and that's really that may even be the first Legion issue I ever read. Yeah, I think it had to do with I always forget the name of the team that they call themselves, but the team that Block used to belong to, the Assassins.
League of Super Assassins.
Yeah, and I believe that issue opens up with Superboy coming to the 30th century and going to Brainiac 5, who is in a mental institution. So he has gone mad, and he is self-aware of this. But yeah, that bit of dialogue just seems kind of weird. Other than I'm not going to fall into that trap again, and hopefully that's true. It'll be a different kind of trap that he falls into, really.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing that's sort of interesting about this interlude and next issue is that we are reading Brainiac 5, who knows what's going to happen in the Crisis, but he himself has yet to experience the Crisis.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it?
Right? Because issue 7 of the Crisis hit apparently the same month that this issue hit. I think it even came out before this issue. Because I have a few little notes on it, and that's what he's referencing, issue 7 of Crisis. So, Yeah, that was something that was always sort of weird. I was like, wait a minute, but he hasn't really gone through the crisis yet. But he knows the history of it, and well, I guess that's what happens when you're dealing with the future.
Yeah, that's always bothered me as well.
Yeah, but those are my notes. Those are my notes for this, and I think we're in agreement that although we had a lot to say about it, so that's always good.
We always do.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the strongest issue, but still lots of little nuggets to talk about.
Yeah. Not the worst issue, though.
No.
I think I can't remember what other issue. Yeah. Still not the worst issue, I don't think. But we don't need to compare. We don't need to find out what is the worst issue. There is something from the letter column real quick from this issue, which one of the letter writers was talking about that very same thing about, I don't want my Legion team to be constantly arguing, et cetera, et cetera. And Paul Levitt says, some of that may be because of the development of, those developments could be because of the rougher tenor from the supervillains plot line that launched this series. And then he says, we'll consider it in the future. So I thought that was interesting, right? Yeah, like the very negative or quote-unquote evil aspect of the first story arc kind of informing the darkness that has been going on, that some readers may perceive to be the darkness, or maybe a perversion of personalities and conflicts and inner conflict. So I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I thought it was interesting that Levitt's at least pointed it out.
Mm-hmm. It seems it's really easy for him to say that because he's the scripter of the stories, and he knows his intention.
Yep.
But what we don't see is in continuity within the characters themselves, what's going on, why that's going on. And if it's not examined even in the sense of they don't really even, they're not even conscious of the impact of that fight with the villains, it can still be conveyed through, whatever means Levitt's employs. It's just, I don't think he's doing it. He's falling short of that, but people are picking up on it, obviously. And he just kind of, I don't know, not necessarily writing it off, but he's kind of, it's because of this, but we're not seeing it in the pages of the book itself, or at least not yet.
Shall we go on to Who's Who? Who's Who number 8. So it's our continuing coverage of any Legion-related material from the Who's Who companion that is shipping at the same time as these issues that we do. Who's Who number 8 has Fatal 5, Pharaoh Lad, Fire Lad, and we might even say something about Barry Allen Flash.
Mm-hmm. He does have a connection.
Yeah, he does. I want to start real quick with this. I haven't been paying attention to it, but now I sort of want to go backwards and look at all the Who's Who entries. But one of the things we haven't been talking about is logo design. So the logo design of like Fatal 5 or the logo design of Pharaoh Lad, both of those very generic. And then Fire Lad, which is also kind of generic. But that is one thing I liked about the Who's Who versus the official handbook for Marvel Universe, is that we got to see logo design for some of these characters. And maybe this isn't a good issue to start off on that because, like I said, they are generic. But I don't know. I just wanted to point that out. Maybe some of the other ones later will be more interesting.
Yeah, because none of these... I mean, Flash is the logo that we've come to know over the years for this character, but the rest are, they're very much pretty boring.
Yeah, the Fatal 5 one is kind of similar to the lettering from their first appearance on the splash page, but it's not 100%. So I'm just throwing that out there that may be something I might look at if we want to look at that later. So shall we go in order, Fatal 5?
Yeah. I mean, opening up the issue, page number 1, with my favorite Legion villain team of all time. So
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because, well, that was very early on. I mean, the Assassins that I just mentioned, that was the first villain team I ever encountered with the Legion, but that was one issue. And then shortly after that, I got the digest, the DC Digest that reprinted that whole Fatal 5 introduction and the death of Pharaoh Lad and the Sun Eater and all that stuff. And so that really cemented my appreciation for these characters. And, beautifully drawn by Steve Lytle, Bill Ray helping him out there. I mean, this is a nice, splashy way to introduce these characters in this issue, I thought.
It's a shame Lytle never really had a chance to draw them.
I know, that's exactly what I was thinking. I would have loved to have seen him do an issue or two featuring these characters.
Yeah. First appearance, Adventure Comics 352 from 1967, a Jim Shooter, Kurt Swan story.
Mm-hmm. And only 6 issues after Pharaoh Lad was introduced, I noticed here
mm-hmm.
through Who's Who. I did not realize that. Pharaoh Lad was so or had so recently at that time been introduced.
It is kind of interesting. We have that interlude in issue 15 on Shanghala, and Sensei says, "I shall care for Mig, and in the end, is it not destiny that provides for us all?" And there's a shot of Pharaoh Lad's tomb.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jim Shooter being the weird comic book prodigy that he was, because he was so young when he was writing all that. Did he know when he created Pharaoh Lad that he was just going to kill him off later?
Yeah, exactly. That was my question in my notes too. Was he just created to be the heroic sacrifice in those, 6 issues later?
So let's talk about Pharaoh Lad by Dan Day. Kind of an odd choice artist-wise. Not too familiar with Dan Day.
No, but I think it kind of evokes the time in which Pharaoh Lad was in the book.
That's true. Also another Jim Shooter creation, as we said. As you said, Adventure Comics 346 from 1966. First appeared alongside Karate Kid, Princess Projectra, and Nemesis Kid.
There's just not a lot to him because he wasn't other than him being, he sacrificed himself, and he's the dead hero for the Legion, one of many, but wasn't he the first to really die?
Think so.
Yeah.
Before Triplicate Girl?
But even still, even if it was Triplicate Girl, they didn't really. I mean, she's still around.
Right.
2 of her are still around, so it's a bit different. But then there's at least a few stories where they, he supposedly haunts them. But beyond that, he's just he's the guy that saved the galaxy when Superboy could not.
Such an odd legacy.
Yeah. Like I said, I didn't realize that he'd only been around for 6 issues before he was killed off, and yet he's had such an impact on the Legion ever since.
Reading his origin here, or his little blurb, the whole thing about he's a mutant and he has he can turn himself into mobile living iron. I mean, he's Colossus before Colossus,
right?
In a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
And then his whole thing about the brother in issue 300 of Legion of Superheroes going into another parallel dimension. I mean, the whole thing is just weird. Fire Lad?
What's to say about Fire Lad?
Here's what I have to say about Fire Lad.
Okay.
And also about Color Kid, because they both were by Keith Giffen, right? And Steve Lytle and you all want to rag on Keith Giffen because he hates the subs, but they get great entries in the Who's Who. They really do have like these really full page, well, except for Chlorophyll Kid. He got a half page. But, That's a big entry for Fire Lad.
Sure.
They don't hate him as much as you think.
I don't think Giffen hates the subs. He just likes to mess with them.
Right.
They are his favorite whipping boys and
Right.
girl. I mean, beyond that though, I mean, yeah, you're right. It's a great little page of Giffen and Kessel drawing Fire Lad, but there's just not much to this character. He only becomes interesting to me down the road in the 5 years later.
I thought it was interesting that in his first appearance, he wasn't named on the cover. So if you look at the original Adventure Comics 306 cover, the subs, it says like an extra story featuring, I don't know if they say the subs, but it's they say Polar Kid, not Polar Boy, although they change it in the story. They mention Chlorophyll Kid, they mention Stone Boy, I think, but they don't mention Fire Lad, even though he's in the issue.
Mm.
And I thought it was also weird. I mean, he's one of those typical, I got my powers from a meteor, right? Like so many others. In that first issue, I went back and looked at it. When the meteor lands, he's already in a Fire Lad costume. And then he's like, oh, I got powers. It's like, yeah, you already got... So that was weird. I'm like, you couldn't give him the costume after he got the powers?
Was this another situation like Comet Queen where she intentionally exposed herself?
No, this was an
to
accident.
Get powers?
No, this was an accident. One of those, because meteors, they just fall and land right near people all the time, So I just thought that was kind of kooky.
And miraculously not kill them.
Right. And then, that's all I have. And then Flash, Barry Allen.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I thought to bring this up was because there is a connection to the 30th century.
Right.
I actually went, so the whole thing is that also around the same time as issue 15, Flash 350 was released. It was the final issue of his series. This whole trial of Flash was going on, and one of the jurors was invaded by another being, and that being turned out to be Iris West, who was not dead, former wife of the Flash. She was still alive because her soul was transported to the 30th century, which is where she was born. And then she was brought back during the trial of Flash so she could make sure that his name was cleared. And then they reunite in the 30th century once he's cleared, just prior to the crisis. And they live a short, happy reunion. So my takeaway, as I was reading at the time, was that little tidbit of her origin, of her being born in the 30th century, was created for the trial of Flash. And when I read this entry about either this entry or one of her, maybe I looked up Iris West's biography somewhere else online, I was like, what is this reference to her being born in the 30th century? Why does it feel like this was an established story somewhere else? So I looked it up, and yeah, it is a story from Flash. From I didn't write it down. It's a Robert Kanigher, Irv Novick story, and somebody else, I can't remember who the other artist was, where she was born, at that time they said 1,000 years later, so I think it was 2975, so it must have been written in 1975. I had no idea that was actually part of her story way before 1985. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. I'll quick look it up again, but I was like, what? I thought they just threw that in there to kind of like shoehorn the whole reason why she could still be alive. And here it turns out that it was like this one-off Flash story where she really was born 1,000 years in the future.
Well, that was a nice little callback then, bringing her back in that the final issue you said of the Flash,
right? Yeah,
or that final arc anyway. Yeah,
so bizarre. So bizarre.
Were you reading Flash comics at that time?
Oh, God, yes. I was reading that trial. It just went on and on and on. Yeah, the Flash trial was not my favorite story, and certainly sales at that time dictated that he was going to die. The Flash story that you find out that she's from the future is from Flash 203 from 1971, or it probably was released in 1970, and then he goes to 2970, not 2975. But the weird thing is, in both this issue and kind of in the Crisis 2, where we do see Flash in the future, is there's no mention of the Legion whatsoever. If the Legion are supposed to be taking place 1,000 years in the future, you would think that story might have referenced the Legion, but it doesn't. At least, I didn't really read it. I sort of skimmed through it, so. But you can't say 30th century without thinking the Legion.
Right, and then you also have the Tornado Twins.
Yeah.
Who, until I guess maybe this time, or this is just me trying to remember back on things, but I knew of the Tornado Twins before this time period of DC Comics, and it was always suggested or accepted, perhaps, that they were descendants of the Flash, and maybe they even explicitly state that. Right. Isn't Bart their son, or was at one point?
Yeah, when Flash goes to the future with Iris, they are the parents of the Tornado Twins.
Oh, okay, that's what I was wondering. I couldn't remember if they were actually the parents of them, or I don't know. That whole part of Flash and 30th century and all that stuff is kind of murky for me still.
Well, maybe that's why they did that, because they were the descendants. They were the descendants of the Flash. Are they in the annual that we're going to read next issue? We'll have to see. We'll have to look at that. But I guess because of the Crisis, and then, I used to always hear about. You always hear about when Crisis came about that they hired a guy named Peter Sanderson to do research. He read every DC comic ever for 2 years, and maybe these are the connections that they're so subtle, where he's like, oh, by the way, Iris is from 1,000 years in the future. Oh, by the way, the Tornado Twins are the descendants. Oh, so you know what we do? We combine everything. We stick Flash in the future. And maybe that's why they don't reference the Legion, is because they're earlier than the Legion formed. And that's why the Tornado Twins are teens when the Legion come about.
Ah, yes.
So that's just somebody just putting that all together. Whoever that is. That's crazy. Crazy. It's just interesting when you finally, when I finally look all this stuff up and just stop taking it for granted. I'm like, oh, wow. How bizarre. Comics are weird.
It really is a universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
One more thing about Flash. Like I said, I knew about Iris. I knew he was in the 30th century. Actually, I think I knew that through Crisis, because when he appears there, there's some comment made about him being in the 30th century. Yep. What I did not know that I learned from reading the Who's Who was that the evidence that helped clear him is because it says. I think it says the evidence was sent back that exonerated him. But you mentioned specifically that Iris what inhabited the body of one of the jurors or something, or she physically came back as a juror.
She inhabited.
Okay. Yeah, I just I knew he was exonerated, but I didn't know the details of it, so I did not know that aspect.
Right.
That 30th century aspect.
Yeah, it's a whole convoluted thing. It gets mucked up by the abracadabra guy. They do have to send information back from the 30th century. It's like, oh, so, here in the present, we're just going to take a newspaper from the future or whatever, some kind of information, and go, oh, sure, he's innocent. I don't know. It's very strange. Very strange.
Yeah.
They had to get him to a point, and that's how they did it.
Right.
Well,
only to kill him off shortly after that.
Yeah, the next month. Because because speaking of the Crisis number 7 shipped the same month as Legion of Superheroes 15, which is the Death of Supergirl issue. And Crisis 8 is where Flash goes, and that's the next month. But the Legion connection in Crisis 7, as I was flipping through it, so this is where we get the revelation, again, to talk about like someone connecting all of this DC history. This is where we finally learn, as stated fact, that the Controllers are offshoots of the Owens. Although later, they both would be called Malthusians. So that part, from Malthus. So I guess that part isn't quite in their origin just yet. But this is the Crisis 7 is the one that connects the Controllers with the Guardians of the Universe for the first time. We see Block on Earth 4 again. And then the 2 Legionnaire members who I forgot. I knew the one was there, but I forgot the other one. When they actually go to combat the Anti-Monitor in Quard, in his antimatter universe, a whole bunch of these very strong DC characters, they all go, they're going to ambush him, and that's where Supergirl dies. The 2 Legionnaires were Mon-El and Wildfire. I forgot that Wildfire went. Which makes sense, because he's made up of anti-energy. So if anybody could survive the antimatter universe, I would think he would. Mm-hmm. And he's the one who says, it's not a famous line, but it is one I always remember. Green Lantern Alan Scott checks in and says, "Hey, where's everybody at? And he's like, "Okay, we're at this headquarters, but we had a casualty." So Wildfire is the one who actually says that line, meaning and referencing Supergirl. Again, not a terribly important line, but it is one I always remembered. That's the thing that set up that someone was going to die, that she was going to die. And then at the funeral, Brainy is at the funeral in Metropolis in the present, along with, I assume, Saturn Girl. You can't see her costume, you just see her hair. So those are the Legion appearances. Other than the cover, there's a whole ton of Legionnaires on the cover to Crisis 7. But there's some fun little Legion facts about the Crisis.
Notice Wildfire's costume is different in this issue compared to the issue that was on the stands of the Legion book.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Yeah,
and I think it's one of the costumes that we see on page 2. Well, yeah, it looks pretty close anyway.
Well, technically, the story in Crisis takes place at least 5 to 6 months prior to whatever books are shipping at that same time. So maybe he gets another uniform. But that's just Perez going, look, this is how I'm going to draw him. If that's not what he's like in the book, too bad.
Yeah. Well, we have a history of him having to inhabit different suits anyway.
Correct.
So
Correct.
It works.
Well, I guess that brings us to the end.
Yeah. Another issue down.
Yeah.
Done.
Next issue, issue 16, Baptism, the final Steve Lytle drawn issue.
Boy, I hope it's a good one.
Well, for now. Yeah. So, oh no, actually next episode, we're doing the Tales. I'm sorry. Totally forgot. We're going to do the big mystery. Who shot Laurel Kent?
So that, and then issue 16.
And then issue 16, correct.
Right.
So we're going to interrupt our normal issue-by-issue flow, throw in the annual, and then we'll come back to 16. So it's a good thing we didn't end on a cliffhanger.
Oh, that's true. Although, I don't know, that would work too. Get people excited for the next one, and then like, here's a different kind of thing for you to experience. Gotta change things up, just like Levitz does.
Any other thoughts?
On this issue? No, I don't think so.
Or in general? No?
No. I'm good. I think we're done.
Yeah, we're done. Let's wrap up, and then we will be back, as we said, whenever we find time to record again. And as always, Long
live the
Legion
Legion Project Podcast.
See you, Eric.
Bye, Peter.